Hello, and welcome to The View from the Top, a podcast brought to you by Benevo. My name is Brian Friedman, and I'm the Strategy Director of Benevo, the world's leading Welcome as a Service mobility tech company. Today's guest on The View from the Top is Peggy Smith, the President and CEO of Worldwide ERC. Now, Worldwide ERC, and indeed Peggy Smith, probably need no introduction at all. Founded over 55 years ago, ERC is undeniably the most influential trade group in the relocation services industry. It is based in Washington, D.C., but has offshoots in both Europe and Asia. What began as the Employee Relocation Real Estate Advisory Council, a US domestic organization developed by a small number of individuals to address the growing needs of a nation moving its employees to increase productivity, has now evolved to become the premier trade association for talent management and global mobility knowledge. In 1964, there were just 6 members. Today, as Worldwide ERC, its network of professionals, partners and stakeholders include nearly 1,600 corporations and some 10,000 service industry members across Europe, the Middle East and Africa, Asia and the Americas. ERC holds conferences in multiple locations globally, and its professional designations, GMS for Global Mobility Professionals and CRP for US domestic relocation professionals, are highly sought after within the industry. Peggy Smith holds a degree in marketing from Seattle University and began her career in that role at R.R. Donnelley before moving into global mobility at Microsoft, where she was responsible for over 5,000 moves a year, both domestically and globally. In 2010, Peggy took the top job at Worldwide ERC, where she is responsible for both setting their overall strategy in conjunction with the board of directors and also overseeing day-to-day operations worldwide. So Peggy, welcome to The View from the Top, and many, many congratulations on your impressive achievements to date.
Terrific, Brian, and thank you. I'm so honored to participate in this series with you and with all of your colleagues at Benevo. So delighted to spend some time.
Great. Okay. Well, let's dive straight into it. I've done a bit of an introduction about ERC and about you, Peggy, but just tell us a little bit about your current role. What's your, what's on the agenda at the moment? What's your day like? What's the staffing of the organization like? What are the plans? Just tell us a little bit about ERC at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I always talk about stepping back to step forward. And so, in order to understand what the trade association environment is like and what Worldwide ERC is like, you have to step back and say, what is driving the broad economy? What's on the minds of CEOs? How is that filtering down into the HR business unit? And how then is that furthering penetrating across global mobility or the movement of talent, right? And so the trade association is part of that ecosystem that involves every element of global mobility. We just happen to sit in a place where, we focus on advocacy in a variety of different areas. But when you ask, what is going on there, well, you step back and say, well, what's happening in the war for talent? What's happening with talent scarcity? What are companies struggling with? And how can the trade association help? And you know this, Brian, from your own personal journey. We're seeing tremendous opportunity and tremendous disruption. And, what a trade association can do in that environment is serve as a lighthouse. So let me spend a few minutes talking about, that disruption and that transformation. So we've watched business models, go under massive change. We've watched the type of individual that is moving change. We're watching a younger generation come into the workforce that want different things than maybe my generation did. And so as a result of that, against the backdrop of largely, historic unemployment levels, organizations are having to get creative. So the trade association cannot sit in that ecosystem without needing to undergo its own transformation. You can't be part of it and, end up saying, okay, well, we're going to stay true to what we have felt and what delivered us to where we are. That doesn't work. So about 2 years ago or so, we embarked on our own transformation, and we simply set a stake and a vision that we wanted to become a content engagement organization built on a world-class digital asset stack. And so that's the journey that we've been on as an organization here in the next 90 days and at the end of our calendar year. And for years to come, we're going to be able to see the richness of that investment deliver value back for our members as we've gone through our own transformation.
So does that mean you're becoming more digital, or rather than face-to-face, or is that doing both? Or, what's the balance between digital and real world?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Brian. I believe it is both. And let me describe that to you. We're in the people business. Mobility is a people business. And so, digital has a facet on that because it can give you great insights. It can extend that in-person reach, but we don't intend to abandon that in-person reach. It's a viable component of what we do every day, in terms of, the events that we plan, the live events that we plan. But where the digital assets help is extending that event so that we have sort of a pre-flight coming into something and a post-flight, and then carrying that throughout the year. So we're going to pilot this year, more quarterly touch points that are digital, but with it, in some markets, we will be doing an event, say, once a year or twice a year. But what we'd be able to do is continue through the digital environment by keeping them engaged. So one of the dynamics that we have is we put in a community platform using Salesforce technology, and that's a really robust digital environment for us to carry the conversation, particularly with our corporate friends, and a safe area for them to sort of talk among themselves, ask questions among themselves, and for us to help narrate the dialogue with them, or to sort of moderate the dialogue with them. So it is taking the best of digital, supplementing it with the in-person, and making sure we continue that dialogue throughout the year. So it's not just a one and done, or it's not purely just digital.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting, obviously there's various aspects to the relocation and the mobility profession, but some parts of it are very, very technical. So, tax laws, immigration laws are very much a question of right or wrong and compliance. But other parts are much softer and much more trend-driven. And what I think a lot of people in your community want, and certainly what I hear in the industry, is they want to know what everybody else is doing. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what are others doing? What works for other people? And I think one thing that's interesting in all of this, and I found it in my FEM days, I'm sure you find it with ERC, is this feeling that almost one of the things that we're doing is sharing experiences between one organization and another, so that they can learn from each other in an area where there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer.
Yeah, you hit on a fantastic point there. I piloted this past March, and we've carried it through a couple of different venues, what I would call, what I do call, it's not what I would call a hackathon. And you might be familiar with that term from a software development environment. So I piloted this in March, and I walked into a group of corporate professionals, asked them, can I try this pilot with this group? And so what we did, it is exactly what you talked about, Brian. We sat around and we said, okay, we're going to spend 10 minutes. I want everybody to throw up to us as moderators what your pain points were. And so, with everything, it was a whole, we ended up with, sheets and sheets of this. And then I think we had about 2 hours, and then we had somebody make an elevator pitch for which of those specific pain points they wanted to tease out. And so, whatever it might have been, cross-border movement or extended business travel, whatever the topic was that they threw out the pitch. And then what we did was we had the room work the issue. And what was amazing about this, and one of the many things I love about our industry, is that in that room, we're largely seasoned professionals, and we're, freshmen. That this was the first time and they were new, and maybe they didn't have the network or they didn't understand. And what became really fun to watch in front of my eyes was this natural sort of mentoring that had occurred. So the people that were more seasoned were like, hey, we had that issue and this is what we did to solve it. And then likewise, even the seasoned professionals had challenges where, they just needed a fresh set or somebody outside of their own environment to help, them solve that. So we carried that then, we did it at our event in Atlanta in May. And now what we've done, Brian, and just a few minutes ago, we were talking about digital. Now we do that in our digital platform. So it's a quick way to sort of throw out pain points and get a collective group together to solve it. And it's a great use of people's skills. It's a great way for people to feel good about the contribution. And it's a great way for people to sort of get quick answers to dynamics or questions that they're facing in their day-to-day jobs.
And when you get into conversations with people, I'm sure you must be having them every day. What are the main pain points that you're seeing at the moment?
Well, it's really interesting. I think that, it used to be for years and years, you'd sit and you'd talk to our corporate HR friends and ask them, what was their number, what kept them awake at night, so to speak. And it was a tremendous amount of cost pressure. And I don't want to suggest, Brian, that cost isn't as important today, but it has definitely moved. And so what you're hearing are two different things. Their number one pain point, no matter where you are, is compliance with the specialization in immigration. The immigration laws are changing so rapidly, even here in the United States, right? But around the globe, you're watching companies sort of choose between a protectionist approach to immigration or to sort of a welcoming approach. And that's not a bias. I'm simply sort of stating that you're watching, countries, Canada has a 1 million tech workers by 2020 initiative that they want to bring in. But you have other countries sort of saying, no, we want to go the opposite direction. So that's a pain point. But the other exciting thing, though, that you're talking about when I spend time in the field is around experience, employee experience. And this, I think, is one of those direct results of leadership. We talked about this a few minutes ago, where leadership is simply saying, we've got global unemployment at historic lows. How can we attract and retain and keep sticky employees? We really need to focus on their experience with us. It's not necessarily about the compensation. It's not necessarily about the benefits. They're important. But what kind of experience are we giving them while they are here, so they can do their best work while here? And so when I get out in the field, that's really what I hear, is this sort of concern and diligence and hypersensitivity around cyber/immigration or compliance/immigration, but then this excitement around redefining the employee experience.
Okay, I mean, you raised two subjects there. You raised the question of immigration and protectionism, and then you also raised employee experience. I'd like to drill down on each in turn. But let me just start off with the first one, the question of immigration. And the way certainly that I see it, and I look from afar at your country, and I look much closer at my own country, and I look at other countries around the world, is we seem to be in an era of rising populism and nationalism. And one of the side effects of that, of course, is a rising concern about immigration. And clearly, as people working in large organizations, we want to have the flexibility, the freedom to move our employees around so we can get the right person, the right job at the right time, and hopefully as swiftly as possible. I'm sure most mobility professionals would say life would be a lot easier if there were no immigration laws whatsoever. They then put on their other hats as citizens, and they actually say, well, actually, we do want to have some immigration protections. And there's this conflict almost between the global corporations that we're working for and the more nationalist countries of which we are citizens. How do you see that playing out? I mean, I always used to think that globalization would just always continue, and was one of those defining characteristics of human nature, that the world just globalizes. But now I'm seeing this other trend of nationalism, and I'm just wondering how you see that panning out. Do you see globalization trumping nationalism, or do you see nationalism sort of in some way restraining globalization?
I think it's a really important subject, Brian, and topic that you're teasing out here. From my perspective, the term we often would say is the genie's out of the bottle. I think globalization is here to stay. And you don't have to look back too many years, 8, 9, 10 years ago when we had, here in the United States, we returned the Great Recession. But it was a global impact. It was absolutely felt globally. It wasn't one country. It was a global, it was felt around the world. And each country, in your own, and then over in Asia, they all went through their own renormalization, if you will. Ours was triggered by a U.S. housing crisis. Yours might have been triggered by something else, and likewise over in Asia, right? But we were all affected. It was all, so interconnected. I don't see anything at all, that would suggest that globalization is going to go away. And that's largely driven by, this mindset, a borderless environment that we live in. And it's a mindset. So when you talk about youth, for example, they want a global experience. They want to have the capabilities to go live in Brazil or go live in Australia or go live in London, and their education environment, everything they came up really sort of created that opportunity for them in their sort of their academics, as well as the way that they looked at the world. And let's talk about the academics for 1 minute here, Brian. It used to be when you would go to university, when I was younger and went to university, it was not a common practice to study abroad. It was a specialization. Now, if you don't offer that as part of your routine curriculum, you're not going to get kids. They're not going to want to come. So globalization is here to stay. how we operate within that economically, I think leads to, okay, what are we going to do? Obviously trade discussions that sort of get disrupted when, different leaders come into different countries, et cetera, or security, those kinds of things. What I think has maybe occurred is confusion or lack of clarity or sort of a framework around, well, how can you have globalization to remain economically viable and have border security? And I think we blend those two, and I'm not sure that that's the right approach. So, having border security, and for the UK, any country, Germany, United States, Canada, to know who crosses their border, that's an important thing for any country to have. But where I think you have to create the balance is, well, we got to know who crosses the border, but we also need to remember that you're going to have this fluid movement of talent. And so, it's really hard, I think, and the devil is in the details to figure out, well, where can you create that so that the best of both can operate in a country? And not be, a fear approach or an approach that says, well, we don't know who crosses our borders, therefore we don't want anybody to cross our border. That kind of dynamic.
Yeah, and it raises the question, of course, because the companies themselves are very, very global and dynamic. So, especially if you take the more modern companies, the Amazon, Netflix, Facebooks, whatever, TripAdvisors, Uber, there's hundreds of them. If you take those sorts of companies, they can be headquartered anywhere. They can have their operations anywhere, and they can, they can create whatever structure they want. And that makes a major challenge for governments, especially when it comes to things like tax collection or even sort of in terms of controlling the people in their countries. Because if they don't let the people come to the jobs will go to where the people are.
Yeah,
and so we're seeing this almost face-off now between the nation and the corporation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I don't know if you did this deliberately or not in your question there, Brian, but the companies you named, you named Amazon, Netflix, and Uber, they're all largely platform businesses. Now, Amazon to a lesser degree, but, both Netflix and Uber, for example, is a platform business. They don't necessarily own cars. They put the supply of cars up against the demand from people that wanted to travel, right? Or you needed a quick way to not travel, but, get a ride somewhere, right? So for them, borderless, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because they're a platform business. And so, you see it with the Airbnbs, you see it with a variety of different, Netflix is another one, they're now generating their own content, but, largely a platform business. So I think when you begin to peel this back to your very point, you're absolutely right. I think companies that need the global population, that need the global access to talent and want the global opportunities for growth, they're going to really have, I think, a formidable impact on policy to ensure that they can remain economically viable as a company.
Got it. Yeah, I think we're pretty much on the same page. I want to just move on to the other thing you talked about when you talked about the two big issues that you saw. And you were talking about employee experience. And, going back in the day, I think people talked about customer experience, and then we're seeing employee experience and assignee experience. What have you seen that companies are doing to enhance it? What is employee experience? Obviously, I'm quite biased because Benevo is an employee experience company, and that's what we do. And maybe we'll come onto that in the debate. But just tell me a bit about your experience of experience and what you think makes a good assignee experience and what you've seen companies doing to enhance it.
Yeah, well, I will step back and pull it away, and necessarily from just pure assignees, but, I love this question. I love this discussion. And so, I see it pop up in a variety of different things. And I'm going to start with when the youth, Generation Z, so those roughly 2021 and under right now, they're getting ready to graduate in the next year or two and come into the workforce. Their perspective and what they want from an employer is completely different from what I wanted. They don't necessarily look at themselves as staying at that employer for much more than 2 to 3, maybe 4 years max, right? So they are looking for an employer that has a larger purpose, that they feel as though by them providing their skills to that employer for whatever length of time, again, a short and less than time, that they are giving back to the greater good. Now, the greater good could be climate, it could be sustainability, it could be something local philanthropic, it could be something else. That is a really important part for them. So they're going to be making an employment decision when you talk about employee experience based upon, what can I feel good about my give back while I'm here? So that's one aspect of it. certainly there is, in the tech vertical, for example, a lot of those companies really got started in many ways by being an extension of the college environment. So you'll frequently hear at the tech companies them talk about a campus, just Google's campus, those kinds of sort of environments. So they extend that. So what is their day like? So we talked a little bit about what's the company like, what's the company's mission. Now let's drill into what is my day like? What is my environment like here? Do I feel welcome? Does it feel inviting? Do I feel that, it's part of a community? So it's not just, we're here 8 to 5. And that's an important distinction because the day is blended now. So, you hear so much about, it's not work-life balance, it's work-life integration. I'm connected all the time. I'm sure you're connected as well, meaning through my phone or, whatever. We're always connected. And so what is that day environment like?
Peggy, it's addicted.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. Somebody's going to come up with an 11-step program for us. But within that, so now you take it, even one step sort of further and you say, okay, I'm always going to be connected. Now let's take this all the way down to then what are the suite of benefits, right? And so you'll hear, is it competitive pay? Because everybody wants to be paid competitively. Okay, that's fine. What's the benefits like that are traditional benefits? But then what I'm hearing around employee experience, Brian, is this set of benefits that are tailored to you, that you have some flexibility with. So, for example, let's say that you are a single parent. So you might prefer a set of benefits that the company can offer that helps you with your childcare or helps you to find a nanny. Or let's say you don't have children and you have pets. You would maybe prefer to have something with pets. Or let's say you live in a part of the world that drivers are common. And so you might want a stipend in your compensation that gives you a driver. So that's really then saying, okay, what's the experience and how can I help with that? And then I'm going to add one really kind of fun thing that I think is a trend that's getting ready to take off. And that is, we are so connected, as I mentioned a moment ago. And I would assert that most of us, our business day starts on Sunday afternoon or evening because you watch it. You'll watch your emails start to load up because as people unwind their weekends, they'll kind of get a jump start on Monday morning. So you'll see, it's not a heavy thing. There's no meetings, but you'll see it start to load up. But by the time we get to Friday, we're done. We are cooked. We're done. So I had the privilege a few months ago of meeting an economist, Dr. Marcy Russell, and we talked about this, and it didn't hit me until she said this. But if you study university, right, most universities really do not attend to children or youth, having classes on Friday. So now you've got this youth that are going to be coming into the workforce, as I mentioned. They're not used to going to classes on Fridays. They don't want to go to classes on Fridays. So you're starting to see companies offer where you don't work on Fridays or you only work till noon as a company. And some are piloting it with summer hours. Some are piloting it in different ways. And so I share that because I think they're saying we believe in work-life integration. We know that you are plugged in all the time. The employee experience I want to have you have is understand our company's mission, understand what our greater good is, understand, what the environment might be like for you to come and work in your physical environment if you're coming into a physical environment, but then understand the benefits that I can tailor to you, and then couple that with, we want you to get wellness of mind, so we're not going to have office on, you don't need to work on Fridays or you work 3 hours or things along those lines. So this is just at its infancy, all this, and think we're going to see some intense creativity come out from HR departments around the employee experience. I'm going to add one other thing, Brian, and that is that I believe this is a space that mobility can have a huge impact to an organization. And that is largely driven from the fact that we know people want an experience. The day of coming into the employment world and saying, I have to have a house or this, and I want all these acquisitions. No, if you interview youth, they want an experience. If you want to be an attractive employer and keep that youth for whatever length of time, where can you offer them an experience that is going to cross a border? Mobility has a huge role to play in this. And it doesn't have to be, a long-term assignment. It can be an extended business traveler trip. It can be something even smaller than that, but offer them that experience where they can cross a border. You're going to get your widening of the pipe for your talent will come there. Not everybody might be a fit, but I think it's one of the great things, and I think it's under-tapped that mobility doesn't stand up and champion more of that for the organization and make it a strategic lever to attracting talent rather than I need you to be here. Let me come to an environment where I can choose to go work there. I don't know if that makes sense, but Brian, in my voice, I get super excited and passionate about the potential.
You and me both, Peggy. I mean, I remember seeing a survey recently, I think it was in the UK, and I think it said something like 80% of all new graduates want to work overseas at some point in their career. There's that feeling that this generation of employees, the idea of, well, as you were talking about earlier, staying in the same job for an entire career, but staying in the same location for an entire career is very much, last century, last millennium. But then the other question I think that we're seeing, and certainly it's something we take on very much at Beneva, is that we're looking at the generation who I'll call them the TripAdvisor generation or the Amazon generation. And what I mean by that is that when they buy something, they go onto Amazon, they don't just look, in fact, they probably don't pay that much attention to what the company says about its own product. What they're more interested in are the user reviews. What do other people say who've experienced that? And similarly, if they go on TripAdvisor to book a holiday, they're looking to see what other people have said about wherever they're planning to go. And to me, when I look at mobility, I think most assignees have really only got one question they want to ask, they want the answer to, which is, what do people like me do? So if it's a question of, opening a local bank account, well, my colleagues, which bank accounts did they use? If I'm going to an office, what is the best way to commute to work? What is the best sort of accommodation for someone like me working for a company like this to get? And I think that's what we're starting to see, and we're doing that. I'm sure that others will be looking at it too. Is this whole question of enhancing the assignee experience so that it is hyper personalized to their individual experience in their company at that time, at their level, which is probably something that mobility hasn't done before, certainly not if we go back 5 years. It was much more standardized. But I think these days, and that's going to be the challenge going forward, is that I think we're going to see this demand on hyper-personalized information and assistance. And also they want it now. They don't want to phone somebody and get a call back a few hours later. They want it online in bite-sized chunks in the same way they would do if they went onto TripAdvisor.
Yeah, you know what, you're absolutely, I think, spot on there, Brian. The peer evaluation is what I don't know if that's the term that it's out there in the industry, but I'd call it the peer evaluation. You rely far heavily around, even if you look at movies, Rotten Tomatoes, you don't know the person that went to see the movie, but that rating has an importance to you as you bring that in. So I absolutely think that, this is something that they'll take a look at. And the digital platforms allow that to occur, and it's funny, as you were sharing that, Brian, it wasn't too many years ago when we would talk about long-term assignments, and the number one thing that people were always worried about is, well, what's going to be my job when my assignment ends? Do you know what? That doesn't get discussed any longer. That's not discussed because they look at the assignment like almost like a one-way opportunity, and they're not worried on the backside of that assignment of not finding employment, because they're going to become more valuable by having crossed that border, learned a new culture, and done that. So, again, it wasn't that long ago that was the thing. Well, don't lose touch of your assignees, and your assignee would worry, well, what's going to be my job? You don't hear that conversation at all any longer. And the groups that are starting their employment or, early into their employment, not just starting it, but let's say early into their employment, what they come ready with? A network. And that is the most powerful thing to them. They are networked, and the digital platforms allow them, LinkedIn, their own little platforms allow them to have that. And so that if something were to happen in their employment that, either by choice or by not, they're plugged in. And unemployment being where it is, it doesn't raise a concern for them. And so it's really interesting times, sometimes.
It is an interesting time, and I think that comes on to, I'd like to ask you about our industry as a whole, because I think probably nobody knows it better than you do. And, we've seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the last couple of years. One company taking over another for reasons of market dominance, or maybe a company's been struggling, or maybe it's spreading the cost of technology over a broader client base. But we're seeing quite a bit of consolidation in the industry. But we're also seeing disruptors coming in. I can think of a few who come in with new ways of doing it. Do you think, in overall terms, there's going to be further consolidation amongst the suppliers, or do you think that in fact there's going to be more? A lot of industries tend to consolidate down to a fairly small number of suppliers. Do you think we're going to see consolidation, and if so, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
So, I do. I think we're going to see further consolidation. And the way that I look at this, Brian, and you know this as well. I mean, you're a seasoned executive too. And that is that, you have sort of these, the RMCs or the GMMs or however, you want to call that layer there. But then underneath that, you've got various verticals. You've got household goods, you've got temp accommodations, you've got immigration, the list, right? What I think is happening is, and I'm going to date myself here a little bit with the Rubik's Cube, but in a Rubik's Cube, you have a lot of moving parts to get the solids on all sides, right? So what's happening, I think, in the verticals is their own mini disruptions. So you're seeing sort of mini disruptions, destination services. You're seeing it in temp accommodations. You're seeing it in household goods. I mean, certainly here in the United States in real estate. And what's happening with those then naturally have an impact on the broader sort of integration that has occurred. And to your very point, I mean, we watch companies do unique acquisitions or partnerships. So, we watched everything from Topia's acquisition of Polaris. We've watched, the relationship between Deloitte and Barry Appleman. And, and that's just to name a few. I mean, there's several out there, other examples. So I do feel as though there's more to come. When an industry gets disrupted, it might start off as a small sort of, one thing in one area. But now I think we're full tilt into this within the mobility industry. We're completely in. You're seeing it in all various areas. And I think it will occur for a period of time. I think what will come out the backside of this will be more platforms. Again, think back to what we're talking about, Airbnb, Uber, not to name those companies, but just a platform approach to business. And I also think you're going to see a potential change in thinking around subscriptions. Now, I don't really yet know how I think about subscriptions and how it plays in our world. But here's what I do know, Brian. Subscriptions businesses are projected to grow 9 times greater than the Standard & Poor's 500, okay? If you'd have told me 5 years ago, and I'm going to be myopic on the U.S. for a second, but that I would have, fresh food delivered to my door weekly, right, through a Blue Apron or those kinds of things, we would have thought you're crazy, But the top 5 subscription models, Amazon, Blue Apron is another one, Birchbox, which is like personal goods, Dollar Shave Club. So think about that for just a second. I mean, shaving has been around for centuries, I suppose, Brian. I don't know. Yet here they are. They're one of the top 5 subscription businesses. That's crazy if you step back and think about it. So I do feel like there is more disruption to occur. But ultimately, on the backside of that, I think you get efficiencies and I think you get growth. But as in any disruptive model, certainly there are casualties. I mean, you talked earlier about Netflix. Look what happened in that content environment. Blockbuster here in the United States owned that space. Everybody went and they got their DVDs and da-da-da. Netflix came onto the scene with a really simple statement, no late fees. Now look at them. They're a content powerhouse. So in Blockbuster, what happened? They're no longer there. So I do think we are, as an industry, right in the center of the storm, or the eye of the storm of the hurricane for that massive disruption with more to occur. And I don't think we should be afraid of it. I think we should, get in there, be excited about it, and look to the backside of it. I think those that are in denial about it, that's a troublesome or worrisome, I think, mindset to be in.
Yeah, I hear you, and I agree with you there. Tell me, if we put your sort of, your dreamer hat on, or your sort of visionary hat on, and we go forward, say, 10 years, what do you think are the biggest changes we're going to see in the industry? What will the industry look like in 10 years' time? And throw in anything you like there. Throw in platforms, throw in artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality, throw in demographics, politics. But what do you think the industry would look like in 10 years' time?
Well, as an American, in your first engagement with somebody or your first interview, you keep politics and religion out of it. So I'll be very delicate there. What I would say that I see occurring, and you hit on a couple of these things: artificial intelligence, automation, those kinds of dynamics. I see, and I don't know that it's 10 years out. I think it's going to happen much quicker than that. And this all ties back to some of our earlier conversations around unemployment levels and population replacement rates, which we didn't really talk too much about. But while there's 7 billion people in the world, there just aren't enough people to keep the next generation economically viable, save for the continent of Africa, right? Where their population replacement rate is quite robust. But the rest of us, the rest of the developed world, major countries within the European theater don't have that luxury. So in order to remain economically viable, I think in 5 years' time, Brian, we're going to be working side by side with robots. And I think that's, definitely going to occur, number one. Number two, I think automation of routine tasks are just going to continue to accelerate. As technology gets more robust and sort of, more economical, you're going to see that take over as well in a big way. I also think that I'm very bullish around mobility. I think you're going to see a lot more people moving for their job opportunities. And it may not be the traditional move that we are experiencing today, but as we noted earlier, the genie is out of the bottle. So I think mobility is going to be very healthy. We are at what I consider almost the pinnacle of what I call the work everywhere, work anywhere revolution. This is now the Internet of Things, revolution. You went through industrial and technology, and now, the IoT is sort of here. So I believe we're going to add a subset of that, or maybe its own revolution, is this work anywhere, work everywhere revolution. And there's nothing I see economically on the horizon that will change that. Now, because you asked me a little bit about politics, I will throw a little bit of a cloud cover over this, and that is to suggest that politics will change, depending on who gets elected and what different countries choose to do. So I think that could have an impact. Everything that I'm sharing with you all sort of goes against, we've had really robust growth economically globally for a protracted period of time. We might see some headwinds in the not too distant future that might slow that down. I'm not by no means, I'm not an economist. I'm not suggesting, recessions are around the corner. I'm simply saying, look, every good run up does have a downturn. So that, I think, we're probably going to be closer to that downturn because we've had a number of good years of good growth. So just the economic environment to me suggests that could change. Here's one other thing, though, and I think this is a little bit of a darker cloud, and that is cybersecurity. So that is not going to go away. Economies will ebb and flow. Leaders will be voted in, voted out. That will change. Two things I know that I believe will stay the same, and that is unemployment will remain low. There aren't enough people for the job, so we are going to be working next to robots that will have a lot of intelligence. But our job, I think, will be more strategic into an organization, and then throw over that the cybersecurity. That's not going to go away. It doesn't matter who's in power in any country or what the economic world is. Cybersecurity is a daily threat, and the more information we give into a digital platform, the richer that is for somebody to don't figure out how to go and steal that or violate that. And you can pick up a trade rag nearly daily and see where there's another breach of something. It doesn't really matter what it is. No country, no company, I think, is immune from that. So that's what I see out there on the horizon. But it's fun. We're going to have fun, Brian. We're going to have fun.
That sounds good. So we're nearly out of time, but I just wanted to ask you one last question, a bit more about sort of, you and your personal experience, Peggy. And the question is this: is that who inspired you in your career when you set out, or you must have met so many people as you're working through the profession. And as part of that, what lessons did they teach you, and what lessons would you pass on to people coming into global mobility today? So a big question.
It's a big question. We'll take another hour here. No, I promise I won't. It's a great question, and I might start maybe on the backside of that as what I would advise people coming in and either new into their career, new into their profession. And I don't know that this is terribly different from people that are in it. So let me play that through a bit here. I believe in lifelong learning. I believe in putting yourself in an environment where you can learn. Now, in doing that, I think, one, you need to find your voice, and you need to not be afraid to ask. And I don't think the people that come in are inhibited by that. I also feel like you need to have a network of people. And what I created is people that I never really named formal mentors. I'm somebody that I don't have too much structure around that, but I have a tremendous amount of informal mentors. So they may not know they're mentoring me, but they are. And so what I looked for, and I would encourage people to look for this, is you have to find somebody, sometimes it's a celebrity, sometimes it's an individual, who speaks to you and your persona. So, for example, it's somebody that you might admire because of how they deliver a presentation. You might admire because of how they think deliberately. You might admire for what they have accomplished. You might admire for whatever that is that speaks to you. And so within that construct, Brian, I tried to create this virtual set of mentors. And so I'm like, wow, you know what? I really like how that person stands up and delivers a speech. So I'm going to study everything I can about that person. I'm going to try to emulate them. I'm going to research them, and because that's what I want to be. That's my aspire to state in that environment. This person I really like for this reason. This person I really like for that reason. So that, to me, it's that combination, and it's saying, you know, be a lifelong learner. Don't be afraid to ask the questions, and then create that network of mentors that, again, they don't have to all be named. And a lot of us, Brian, you know, another pivot on this, a lot of us get called into meetings. I mean, you know, I've been in meetings, you know, even in my current role and in my prior roles, where you're sitting around the table going, oh my gosh, why do I need to be here when we're talking about how paint dries, right? And when I got caught in those moments, what I tended to do was to say, what is one thing I can take out of this meeting? And it may not have anything to do with paint drying, but it might be watching somebody influence resources that they didn't control, or it might be watching somebody craft an argument to sort of win over a point, so to speak. And so it was always searching for what I could walk away with and take back and improve upon myself about. So lifelong learning, key. Building a network of trusted mentors is key. And I think that goes anywhere you go.
Okay, thank you very much, Peggy. It's been absolutely fascinating and a delight to have you on the podcast. So I'm sure I'm speaking for all the listeners as well. Thank you very much for giving us your time and being on The View from the Top. Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you, Brian. I've appreciated the opportunity. I look forward to seeing you out in the field in the not too distant future.
Absolutely. I'll see you in Boston later on this year at your annual convention. And thank you to all for our listeners for tuning into The View from the Top, a podcast brought to you by Benevo. And we look forward to catching up again with another guest this time next week.